talk about Joss Whedon. Because Joss
Oh
Whedon
boy.
was
Okay.
was this was big last night. Right, this article came out and set the internet ablaze. Right, so much so
Mhm.
that like there was a lot that was said, and even what was said about Gal Gadot, there was a response to because there's this clip that popped up today on Good Morning America. Good Morning America was all over this.
Wait.
I belong to no one. This morning, Wonder Woman star Gal Gadot standing up for herself. In a new article for New York Magazine, the famed director of hits like The Avengers and the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Joss Whedon, now on defense over allegations that he threatened Gal Gadot's career while filming the 2017 film Justice League. Gadot telling the Israeli news outlet N12 last year, quote, "I had my issues with Joss and I handled it. He threatened my career and said that if I do something, he will make sure my career is miserable."
When these stories start to come out, it makes people feel that they've been betrayed. And, he's, of course, responsible for his behavior.
Now, more than 8 months later, Whedon speaking out for the first time about Gadot's accusation, telling New York Magazine, quote, "I don't threaten people. Who does that? English is not her first language, and I tend to be annoyingly flowery in my speech." Adding that he was joking with Gadot in response to her wanting to cut a scene from the movie, saying that she would have to tie him to a railroad track and do it over his dead body. Gadot telling the magazine in an email, quote, "I understood perfectly." Whedon, famed for working on projects with strong female characters, also answering to accusations of misogyny and abusive behavior.
It began really when his ex-wife came forward and, called him a hypocrite preaching feminist ideals. There are, I think, clearly patterns that emerge when you look at the stories side by side.
Whedon admitting to the magazine he slept with employees, fans, and colleagues while working on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which eventually led to his marriage ending. Whedon now telling the magazine's reporter Lila Shapiro that he's been in therapy for years and even checked into an addiction treatment center for a month.
So I think it's like it opens up a space about, how power plays out in these spaces and how it can make people feel. And ultimately, like how damaging it is for these directors to be worshipped. It's not good for them and it's not good for anyone around them.
Both camps declined to comment, but Shapiro says she spoke to Whedon and people who worked for him for months. And while a clear pattern emerged, it is a complicated story, and that entire article is worth a read. Guys.
So I thought that was really fascinating.
Oh man, there's a lot to digest with that.
There's a lot to digest with that. I mean, like that Good Morning American clip. I mean, in my mind, I don't know how you feel about it, but in my mind, it comes across like it's kind of defending Joss a little bit.
No, not really. To me, it kind of like basically said he's culpable for his own actions. I think it tried to stay as unbiased to either party as possible, which is surprising considering it's Good Morning America. But there's one thing that I kind of take issue with, and I will be curious to see how people react when I say this. I appreciate them addressing what happened to Gal Gadot because I think what Joss Whedon said, especially about the English comment, I thought was very disrespectful and insulting the way it came across in that article.
Yeah.
There's a huge problem here. Why is it that when it's Gal Gadot, it gets this media coverage, but when it's Ray Fisher, they're silent about it and don't even give him a mention that he also raised allegations? Or
well,
any of the Buffy cast or anybody, not even just Ray, but especially Ray in reference to this movie. Why is Ray Fisher not being highlighted in this piece? That I know Gal Gadot's the quote unquote bigger name. I just think that that's odd to me. I'm not a big fan of like them omitting that because that's part of the story here as well.
That you're right. That is part of the story. That's a very interesting way of that this is kind of, that's why I said maybe it sounds like they're kind of like defending him a little bit because it does come across like that.
It's just a glaring hole in the story that they're not filling in because Ray has been here on the front lines calling out Joss Whedon. He's been very upfront about what's going on. And again, he's also coming forward allegations. So why is he not being featured in this piece either? It's very odd to me.
Well, Benson here brings up a point. Says because Fisher presents no evidence for his claims and never has.
Doesn't matter though. I mean, I understand that point, but again, the thing is, he is also part of the story. He deserves to be
he is part of the
capacity.
he is part of the story. But one of the things that was mentioned in this article that was true was, remember when Ray gave that interview with Forbes and had, there was like that glaring problem with the whole lightening of the skin tone. Like that was something that we didn't actually push back on, which caused the retraction from Forbes and one of the Faruqi brothers, I forget which one, was, I believe, terminated as a result of that. His freelance contract was terminated because of that adding of it, in there. And that caused a big problem with the fandom at the time, because they thought that it was, Joss Whedon shaking his rattle, right? Rattling his saber at Forbes. But his excuse here was, or his explanation, I don't want to say excuse, but his explanation was he was lightening the tone of the entire movie. And that included lightening up everyone's faces, which is a very, very accurate point if you look at the two films side by side.
No, I get that. I get that. I mean, for me, it's not even just about that, but it's about pretty much everything else Ray Fisher has brought to the table, at least about Joss Whedon. It's like, why is it not being... And listen, it's not even the Ray Fisher thing either. I just think it's odd not to even bring up Charisma Carpenter or anything that the Buffy actresses have said over the last decades in this piece as well. Why only focus on Gal Gadot?
Because
she's a victim.
She's the bigger star, is really what it boils down to. And it's only a 2.5 minute piece. So it's like they're trying to cover as much as they can. Gal is going to get you more splashy headline coverage rather than Ray or Charisma.
Yeah, and I get that, but you can have that be the headline, but why not mention that in the piece? That was like a 3 to 4 minute clip. You couldn't even bother mentioning those names either.
No, that wasn't. It was only like 2.5 minutes, I think, because I found that clip on Twitter actually. So it would have been under 2 minutes and 20 seconds. The Watcher here, I'm dropping the link for that article there if you want to read it. Benson here does say that Fisher keeps ranting despite his issues being settled by Warner Brothers. He either puts up or shuts up. And that's actually kind of what I wanted to talk about today. H Bart's here being a little bit cheeky, says, I know things you don't. Come on, H Bart's. You don't know what I know.
Oh God.
I'm not going any further than that.
I know,
all right. But the last sane one here says, because Fisher is persona non grata. Fisher was accusing anyone and everyone who did not bend the knee to him, including people hired after the fact. And again, look, this week with him going after James Gunn over liking a tweet from a long time ago, of which there was that was like, in my mind, that was petty. And
here's what I'll say about that. I understand him wanting an explanation for that. He has a right to have an explanation for why someone would engage in a tweet. That's kind of like, again, it's a whole thing about that. Seemingly, even though I don't believe Alan Tudyk was trying to defend Joss Whedon or stick up for him, I don't think that's what that tweet was. But again, if he feels he deserves an explanation for that, then that's what Bray believes that he deserves. I just personally didn't agree about the way he went about it. I think it could have been handled privately, or it could have been handled in a more tactful way, but he did what he did, and James Gunn owned up to it, and he apologized and cleared it up, and we're good, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing with that. I don't necessarily think it's petty, as it more so I think it might have just been an untactful way to approach it, right? Because I understand if he wants an explanation for that, because that happens sometimes where it's like, that's a little weird. Why are you engaging in something that might be hinting that I'm lying about something, or hinting or defending somebody who is my abuser, right? So if he believes he deserves an explanation for that, I can understand that ultimately. Just maybe the way he went about it, I don't necessarily agree with 100%. So
yeah, no, I understand. I understand entirely, and I agree with you. I think there could have been better ways to go about it, but obviously with this article, this is what popped out, at least in regards to Ray, where saying here, that he cut down Cyborg's role for two reasons. One, that the storyline logically made no sense, and he felt that the acting was bad. According to a source familiar with the project, Whedon wasn't alone in feeling that way. At test screenings, viewer deemed Cyborg the worst of all characters in the film. So there's been some pushback on that from some people who have said, well, there weren't any test screenings. Well, there were always going to be internal test screenings. And I think that's what it was here. Additionally, and I said this on Enosh's stream last night after my stream was over, because I kind of tuned in and they were talking about it. The thing is, like, you can look at Ray's performance in the Snyder Cut and go, damn, that was really good. But is that what Joss Whedon saw? And the answer to that is probably not. Because at the time, remember, Zach had the 214-minute cut. So there were things that were cut out, and he was trimming it and trimming it and trimming it. So it's entirely possible that what Whedon saw when he was brought in was something that, again, that Zach hadn't maybe finished fleshing out yet, and stuff that was trimmed for time. Like I told you before, Cyborg's story was most likely going to be yeeted anyway because of that hard 2-hour cut, that hard 2-hour.
Which I understand that, and I get that there's a 2-hour cut. But to say that the storyline makes no sense, that logically it made no sense, I don't understand that line personally.
Well, again,
I also, if it's a 2-hour runtime, and this is the thing I keep saying, a 2-hour runtime, I understand would have been insurmountable given the context of what that film ultimately turned out to be with the Snyder Cut, obviously. But you insert certain things like the Russian family subplot or these goofy jokes or goofy moments that don't add to characters. They just add humor. And what was it that you said in Max's stream, Jarbo, about the Russian family plot? Added like
it added stakes. Yeah, it added stakes.
To me, I don't feel that I get what the purpose of it kind of is in that regard. But
yeah,
the execution was so sloppy and horrible.
Sure. Oh, the whole movie was sloppy.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying you could still make a 2-hour cut and not cut those scenes. You could trim them down. You could find a way to make at least one of them stay in.
I think what Zach was intending on doing was, again, Zach likes to buck the system. And I really like, as much as I love the guy and I love his work, let's be fair here. He never listens to he never does what he's told, so it's like one of the reasons why the Snyder, the BVS was cut down was because it was because the cut that makes sense was 3 hours long. Putting a 3-hour long movie, not in the summertime, that's a comic book movie, in theaters at the time could have been seen as detrimental. And clearly somebody at Warner's thought that, because they didn't trust the movie to live on its own merits. So they cut out a half hour. They ordered a half-hour cut, and it destroyed the narrative for the first 2 acts.
But and this is where I would have to ask an editor who edited that theatrical cut. I would love to talk to them and ask, out of all the 30 minutes you chose to cut out, you cut out the stuff with the most important plot beats that explain the whole plot of the movie. Like, you couldn't cut out certain, like, it just baffles me. Again, editing choices where it's like, you didn't need to cut these certain scenes. If you're going to cut out 30 minutes, fine. But there's stuff you can cut out. I don't understand that. Like, that's the other thing I don't get to.
No, you're right. You're right. There's a lot there. The thing is, like, Zach makes meaty movies. That's why I think a 4-hour cut of Snyder Cut was great, because it allowed for all of that exposition and all of that story to build up and then get a really solid payoff. Like, they did a fantastic job with it. But we never would have seen that had things not happened the way that they did. And I think that, and we have to also go back nearly 5 years and at the time. And so this is what I brought up last night. I don't know if you watched my stream from last night, but as I brought up, I
caught a little bit of it. Yes.
Oh, well, what I was saying,
all of it though.
Like, Joss was a director for hire. He's also effectively at like the top of his game, if you think about it, at that time, right? Like, he had come off of doing 2 successful Avengers movies, each of them grossing over $1 billion, the highest grossing comic book movies, like, kind of at, some of the highest grossing ones at the time and everything. And, like, he was brought in as a director for hire to fix what the studio deemed was an unsalvageable mess. Let's be fair. They're wrong, but that's how they viewed it. They were up on a time clock, on a timetable to get the movie out by November.
But that they themselves set up, though. They set that movie up to be the way it did. They wanted their bonuses and because of the merger.
Because the merger is the bigger point there than necessarily the bonuses. That plays into it. Greed plays into it. Hubris plays into it, obviously. But it's a whole factor of things. So you bring this guy in and you're like, okay, first he was being brought in to write the reshoots, and he met with Zach, I think, 1-2 times or something like that. They talked a little bit, and their tones were like, I mean, their style of directing, their style of storytelling is vastly different. I mean, this is oil and water. What the fuck was Warner's thinking? Oh, right. They wanted the Marvel approach, but they still, you could tell
they clearly picked the wrong man to finish the movie. Clearly.
No, they absolutely did. The biggest problem here, though, is that the loss of faith in Zack Snyder started in April of 2016. That was the biggest problem, was
Well,
like
they almost got rid of him. To be fair, they were considering firing him, but
They
ultimately
were.
didn't, and they let him film the movie.
Yeah,
They
and
were
they
just
did.
watching like a hawk on set at the time.
Yeah, they did. And he still shot how he wanted to shoot. Now, again, the thing that a lot of people don't bring up when we talk about Zack Snyder kind of like bucking what he's told to do is he said that during the pandemic, he was he was kind of contracted by Warner's to write a third 300 movie. And he ended up writing something that was about what, like Joan of Arc or some shit, or Marie Antoinette. It was something that was not related to 300 in the slightest. And they turned it down because he was just, he didn't care at that point. Like he just didn't care about working with the company again. So he wasn't going to do the assignment that he was told that he was paid money to do. Because like, fuck, and honestly, he's right. Fuck him. The way they treated him, fuck him. Like, why would he care? And I get that. But it's still like, that is part of the situation where it's like when everyone says no, but Warner's, they, like they'll hit up Zach and he'll want to come back. And it's like, dude, he's already thrown his homework away. He's already basically kind of told him to pound sand, not going to do what they want to do. When it doesn't matter at this point, like he's done. And that's good for him because he's moving on to some other stuff here. But this is where, with this whole thing with Ray, because this is where we kind of get into this. It says, Whedon insists that they spent, hours discussing the character and that it was friendly and respectful. None of the claims that Fisher made in the media were either true or merited discussing. And the only way he could explain his motives, he's talking about a malevolent force, which is a person who is looking to kind of like undermine or cause harm.
Which I don't agree with whatsoever. But.
Well, again, I think it ties into something that is more than just about Joss Whedon. Because there were three names, not just Joss. It was John Berg and it was Jeff Johns. And obviously, Jeff Johns is the primary target. Jeff Johns has always been the primary target. Joss Whedon was just there, but he always wanted Jeff Johns. Remember, because Hamada threw Joss Whedon under the bus to protect Jeff Johns, according to Ray Fisher. That Hamada was the one trying to protect his boy and didn't care about Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon was the one met with remedial action following the investigation, which probably had more to do with how he allegedly treated Gal Gadot than Ray Fisher, because Gal is a much bigger star to the company. And Ray will probably never work with Warner Brothers ever again. So, I mean, you look at it from that perspective, you can start to see like Ray's target has been Jeff Johns. But when that failed, he has turned his attention to Walter Hamada multiple times. And now Joss Whedon. And like, that's why I brought up the question, is Ray Fisher a bully in this scenario? Because of what he was tweeting out today. Now, you were right, RJ. We were talking about this morning.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's like, okay, I think he's going to have a big day. Like I thought he was going to drop some stuff, to be honest with you. I think.
Well, it was clear that he was going to respond in some way. That was the big thing for me. He was going to respond in some regard.
Well, what it kind of started off with this yesterday too, because this is the first tweet he put out yesterday, saying, looks like Joss Whedon got to direct an Endgame after all, rather than address all the lies and buffoonery today. I will be celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Tomorrow the work continues. Now, I think one of the reasons why Ray tweeted this out specifically was because Stephen Colbert had put out this tweet beforehand. This was the first one that blew up, and says, I guess Joss Whedon's comeback strategy was to gaslight Ray Fisher on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Now, if you've read the article, you would know that the woman who interviewed him, I think, was it Laura Shapiro, whatever, she did so in the spring. So releasing the article yesterday on MLK Jr. Day, nothing to do with Whedon. But that didn't stop everybody from jumping on this and attacking him for being racist. Like, he had some control over this. I even heard Enosh last night alluding to that fact.
Well, here's the thing. Does Whedon not have... That's a good question to ask. Does Whedon have no control over when this gets released?
No, not at all. Not at all.
But still, then either way, though, releasing this article or this interview on MLK Jr. Day was still terrible optics for that whole entire conversation, though, in that interview.
Yeah,
it did it no favors.
That definitely fucked him over. Like, it fucked him over in a way it's kind of like, I should point out, I have no sympathy for Joss Whedon, but I have empathy for Joss Whedon. And the two are vastly fucking different. And I have empathy for what I view as a person who has been raised with an affluent lifestyle that has never really understood right from wrong. And in many ways maybe still doesn't understand right for wrong. And we as a culture, especially now, one that's going to be heavily pushing the concept of accountability over entertainment, have to ask ourselves if kicking a person while he's down is considered accountability over entertainment, or is it just entertainment? Right? Because social media, the way that it responds.
But here's the thing, though: is he actually kicking him while he's down, though?
Yes,
That's
I
the
believe so.
question.
I believe so, based on some of the things that I've seen today. So we'll go through the timeline. All right. So Ray put this out this morning. It says here, before I get started today, I just want to thank you all for lifting and supporting everyone that has been negatively affected by Joss Whedon. I was not the first to speak out, but I hope to be one of the last that has to. So again, today, perfectly fine. This is a fine statement to be made. All right, I have no issue with this whatsoever. But then it goes on, and he starts kind of saying here, oh, the irony is Hamada is probably kicking himself right now for trying to throw Whedon under the bus. Had Hamada waited, he would have seen Joss had already bought a round trip ticket to run himself over. Again, that's fine. And he's kind of dancing on his grave a little bit. All right. And again, that's what social media is for.
To be fair, though, I mean, honestly, he kind of has a right to if these allegations are true, and obviously he believes that he experienced something that Joss Whedon did to him personally that was truly horrendous and affected him emotionally, mentally, and maybe even physically. Then he has every right to respond to it how he wants to on his social media platform at the end of the day.
Sure. That doesn't negate the personal attacks, right? That's what I'm talking about here. Because you have this line right here, right? So Joss Whedon has had nearly 2 years to get his story straight. He's likely spent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on PR, crisis management, and coaching. And his response to allegations is, they all misunderstood and are out to get me. Also, my mom is sexy. Now, we were talking about this last night. Dane and I were talking about this and reading up about his childhood. And with his childhood, he had a very influential mother. His mother was a feminist. His mother was an instructor. His mother was very important to him. And he viewed her in a way that I believe to an extent might have been a bit on the Oedipus level. Because what it was also is the way he described his family's life, which was his father was a writer. His mother was an instructor. And if you did not entertain the family, then you were kind of no use to them, which is kind of how he treated people, because that was what we call generational trauma. And so his response there for his mom, it gets taken and kind of hit, but I think it's also kind of a low blow, because he explained further on in the interview that he's changed his opinion on it and he said it wrong, but they're trying to imply here, a little bit of like, what are you doing, step bro mentality, which I think is a bit of a low blow, but hey, listen, if he just wants to call him a bad actor, that's fine. Right. It's all in response to just the idea there about being the bad actor is really what I think what it boils down to. Yeah. And then you have Saggy right there at the bottom. So,
hey, shout out Saggy.
Yeah, I know. So you've got that, right? Well, then it goes on. And then he says here, I'm starting a team called the Malevolent Force who wants in. Joss Whedon's need not apply. Snarky, whatever.
Yeah, but again, though, like, at least for me personally, I think he's allowed to feel vindicated, and I think he's allowed to, in the proverbial sense, dance on the grave, considering the battle he's been fighting for like the last almost 2 years at this point, or a year and a half, however long it's been since this whole thing got started.
Sure, but like I said, his attack was about Jeff Johns, John Berg, and Joss Whedon, and at the time, it was more about Jeff. It's always been about Jeff Johns.
Well, it's always been about the three men in particular. I mean, lately it's been focused on Jeff Johns and Walter Hamada.
But even in the beginning, he said that those men enabled Joss Whedon.
Yeah, no,
and I'm not saying that.
Yeah, the point's been it's all three men though. That's the problem. It's all three men who are culpable and responsible for playing a role in what happened and for doing what they did.
Yeah, no, I get that. I do feel that in essence, what we have to look at here also is, this one is kind of, I think, a little snarky, but all right. And then there's Nicotina. I saw a lot of people responding to him like it was pretty funny. And then he goes on to say here, talks about Charisma Carpenter. It says here, I stand with Charisma Carpenter, who, like this bad actor in both senses, has no agency in determining matters of abuse or race, but for the influence of a white male shadow puppeteer. The New York Mag and Leela Pearl should be ashamed for regurgitating this nonsense. Well, I mean, they're offering up both sides of this, right? And I've speculated this before as well, where I feel that Ray didn't make any act without Zach's explicit approval and support. Because
Well-
the thing, and the reason why, real quick, is because these allegations came out after the contracts and all the deals had been signed for the completion of the Snyder Cut.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a little bit of a timing issue there. Again, I feel Ray Fisher was done dirty by the powers that be, including Joss Whedon. I believe Joss Whedon was brought in to be a director for hire who was enabled by people who were trying to, play up this man's ego to believe that only he could solve this problem they found themselves in because of an oncoming merger that they didn't want to lose their bonus on for being fired for delaying the movie. You know, I mean, you start to kind of see all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
All of it kind of play
and just to address your comment, the last same one, the reason Hamada is involved in all this, and correct me if I'm wrong if I'm getting this wrong, but the reason he is a part of this is not because he was there physically when this stuff happened. It's how he responded to it when he took control of DC Films in regards to the investigation and in regards to how he handled himself when it came to Ray Fisher and how he wanted to seemingly use Joss Whedon as a scapegoat, but let Jeff Johns walk away free and unscathed because of his connections with the company and DC as a whole. That is where the issue came in. That's why he's involved in all this. I believe I got that correct, right?
Yeah, no. That's really what it is. That's basically what it is.
Yeah.
So,
but to be honest, and here's an issue with that article as well. It's full of a lot of dumb. Well, not dumb. How to put this? It's full of a lot of false equivalencies to fascism in the works of Zack Snyder. A comparison to what's
Lenny Riefenstahl.
Lenny Riefenstahl, which is absolutely ridiculous. And again, why that's in that article, which again comes across so heavily biased in favor of Joss Whedon. I understand it's trying to present his side of the story, but the way that article was presented and written seems very anti-Zack Snyder in ways that are so hyperbolic. It comes across as, again, insulting. And
no, I mean, I agree with the Lenny Riefenstahl comment. Never mind the attack on 300.
Yeah.
Later on in the article, calling it like it was racist. It was deemed as racist. I'm like, it was a bunch of dudes in loincloths fighting like exaggerated Persian soldiers. If you wanted to be realistic, they would have been dressed in head to toe armor. You know, like it's a comic book adaptation. It's meant to be exaggerated. That's what Miller was going for. But whatever, man. People are gonna. But that's kind of part of it, though, right? Is like there's been this kind of back and forth and whatever. But what I find to be funny about this is, again, this particular situation. Like he's not really he's kind of denying it, but he's also just kind of blowing it off as well and trying to then reframe the argument. Because there have been people that have speculated that there is some animosity that has gone into this. But I would argue that more or less, and I said this last night, I think, again, nobody wanted to be in that situation. None of the cast did. The cast just did not want to be there.
Again, I understand the circumstances, but given what Warner Brothers did, I don't blame them whatsoever for feeling the way they did at all. I understand why they felt like they were in such a horrible situation, why they kind of probably just threw their hands up and said, I'm not giving this my full effort. Why should I? I get that 100%.
Well,
now, I don't blame them one bit.
Okay, fine. So let me ask you this then. Do you feel that could have tied into the comment about it being a bad actor? If they phoned it in and Joss is in the editing bay, editing together phoned in performances, could that not make you think that you're already getting more having animosity on your end as well? Like that's the kind of point of it as well. It's
it depends on what scenes that he was recalling, because again, if we can go back to that quote, it seemed more like it was in reference to and maybe this is just me misinterpreting it. If I am, please correct me. But to me, that seemed more like he's calling him a bad actor, and he said that the storyline made no sense in regards to what was filmed in regards to his origin story and the scenes where he did a lot of the heavy lifting as an actor. That's what it seemed to imply to me, at least. But either way, right, even if they're phoning it in, I don't think there was truly horrendous acting in majority of the Joss Whedon version. I mean, there's some
it wasn't.
It was
passable acting. It wasn't great. I'll tell you that. I think that the best scenes in that movie, for what Joss Whedon shot, was the scene with Momoa with the lasso of truth, which I actually really liked that scene.
Mm-hmm.
And then the scene where Batman and Bruce and Diana are talking because Ben and Gal had really good chemistry. And you could kind of feel like there was something budding between them, and there was even in the Snyder Cut
but you
as
see
well.
where the issue comes in, though, because that there is no clarity on that. To me, that paragraph read like he's referring to the scenes that were filmed or were being filmed in regards to just Cyborg alone as an actor, in regards to the origin story, and him calling him a bad actor in that sense.
However,
not because of like what he shot in terms of reshoots in the film.
Well, I mean, keep in mind at the end of the day, he's calling him a malevolent force after the fact. And for what's been going on now for almost 2 years. And so, and then looking at what he was going through as well. So you could argue both points, I think, could maybe exist, but we also don't know specifically how much of the movie how much of the movie that Zack shot that Joss actually saw. Because keep in mind, he did go back and rewrite 80 pages. They shot this over 40 days. So it's like there was a lot there. All the key set pieces were there. But like all the other interpersonal stuff was changed. So it's one of those scenarios where you're like, you'd have to really go through frame by frame and like figure it the hell out, which is why, and obviously this person interviewing was very much trying to get to, I guess you could say like the overall meat of the issue versus like, let's say the, like we are close enough to this story to where we know a lot of the finer details on kind of maybe not on all sides, but at least on Zack's side. So we're maybe approaching it from that perspective. But again, Joss may have been, he was a director for hire. He was brought in to just look at what they had, rewrite what they had, shoot what they needed, and get the goddamn thing done in like 6 months. Mm-hmm. I mean, Matthew Vaughn was brought in to X-Men First Class with 11 months to shoot the movie, to write the movie, shoot the movie, and, or I should say rewrite the movie, shoot the movie, edit the movie, and get it in theaters for June of next year. He started in like, he started, I think in like July of like 2011, and had the thing done in 11 months.
Yeah, no, I think it was July 2010 because the movie came out in 2010.
Sorry, July 2011. Because I mean, it was right after Kick-Ass came out. You know what I mean? So there's a lot there on that front. Like there's a lot there with how fast some of these productions operate and everything else. And I'm just wondering again, like Joss. Again, when I talk about the fluency of Joss Whedon, what I mean by that too is think about this guy. He's so full of ego and bravado, right? So full of that, so full of himself, to where this is a guy also like Zack would corroborate with Ray, right? Zack would brought Ray in as a writing partner and worked with Chris Terrio to flesh out his story, and then Joss comes in and Joss is like, I write and you say what I write, and that's that.
Which is, that's not a good mindset to go in as a creative, though, especially when they're dealing with a very emotional circumstance about why the previous director left and like all the mixed emotions, which is how 100% the studio's handling it.
100%. So this is my question then. Do you think then that it's possible that the animosity felt by the cast was then also amplified emotionally in regards to certain interactions when dealing with a business?
I would say for the most part, I think that a lot of the blame goes to both the studio for creating the situation in the first place, for creating an environment that would foster animosity. But at the end of the day, it also comes down to how you respond as well, right?
Yeah.
There can be animosity, but the way you choose to respond to challenges and the way you choose to respond to adversity, you can end up becoming the villain.
Sure. I mean, I found it very weird that Joss had come out and said that you guys are the rudest group of actors I've worked with. Like that to me says that there was animosity on set, like a lot of animosity on set. It was, again, 40 days to reshoot like 70% of this fucking movie, that they spent 6 months filming in London, like the year before, so and then also dealing with Affleck and his issues and everything else going on. There's a lot going into that. I just want to quickly address the H Price here for $5, buddy. Thank you. Says, I know everybody likes Feige, but I could see Ray getting mad at Marvel. I don't necessarily see Ray getting mad at Marvel. I think there's a bit more.
Why would he?
Yeah. Like if there was an issue, I think Feige would find a way to make it work. This isn't like,
because Feige cares about the talent involved. All of
it, and they're not trying. And they know that a good product is going to yield a very good result. DC was in a rush phase. So I could see it happening over maybe like story issues or some shit like this. But at the end of the day, I just don't think it's going to be as I don't see Ray responding the same way at all. And then Benson here for £5, saying, if you're going to debate this, at least read the full interview rather than moan in your lounge over paying $1. No wonder your audience, meaning this audience, is double. Here's the thing with that. With the ad, I went back to the website today. I had the article again up today. It didn't put me on a paywall. So
yeah, I mean, sadly,
don't know.
Listen, right? I mean, the whole. I think it's a mistake to paywall articles in the first place, anyway. So that's their own damn fault, to be honest.
Oh yeah, no, I 100% agree. I 100% agree.
I mean, listen, people are going to cover this, and they're going to cover this in the best way they possibly can with the resources they have, right? So, I mean, you do what you got to do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. And then, thank you for that, Benson, and thank you for that, H-Parts. Appreciate that, guys. So let's see here. Then you have this tweet here. Okay. Now, this is, again, a situation that I think he's being cheeky or he's kind of being a dick. But, Ray here says, well, here's it. Joss Whedon, I don't threaten people. Who does that? The world, I don't know, maybe the guy who used to spend his free time plotting elaborate revenges on his own family. But it's like they're talking about like when he's the youngest of 3 boys, soft and slight and anxious. He had long red hair, caused people to mistake him for a girl, which he says he didn't mind. All right. But like the thing is, he had a connection with his mother. She was capricious and withholding, but she frightened him less than his father and especially his brothers, admirable monsters who bullied the shit out of him. And then so Ray here is trying to point to this thing here. On weekends and in summers, he would pass his mornings pacing the long driveway in the family's second home, making up science fiction universes or plotting elaborate revenges on my brothers. So it's a cheeky throwaway line, and he's making it out to be like he's a fucking school shooter. You know what I mean? Like the type of sociopathic like mindset of like how many people fucking plot revenge on their siblings for being dicks. And we don't know what that revenge is. Elaborate revenges could be like, I'm going to put a spider in their underwear drawer, or I'm going to put honey.
I would say though, it's a strange thing to drop in that article when you're trying to like not paint someone as a monster. Right?
No, it's not. But it's talking about a youthful kid, a kid who grew up with a very, capricious and withholding mother and then a comedy writer father, being the youngest of 3 boys.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like everyone's going to deal with abuse and bullying in different ways. I mean, I've experienced both things in my young childhood. I couldn't sit there and tell you I ever plotted revenge or like an elaborate revenge. I mean, I think that's a little extreme even for me as a child, but I was never put in a situation where like I felt like I needed to do something like that. I just think like that line, the way it's worded, perhaps the way it's written, doesn't necessarily paint the best of pictures for him, though. That's the thing.
No, it doesn't. And I don't think it was necessarily meant to, but it's meant to give you context and understanding. Like there's a part in there where they talk about like, what is it? There's a line in there about how a young boy died at a pond on his family's property, right? And Joss had asked the boy to go hang out with him at the pond. He's alluding to the fact that this boy had died after Joss had walked away. A 5-year-old walked away from another kid. Like it's not whatever. But he even, it's a terrible tragedy that Joss even says, like, even after this happened, my parents never taught me to swim. There was no structure. So what we're talking about here is a household that put value on what you could bring to the table. And other than that, you were kind of largely forgotten. And that's an issue that, like, again, if you look at the way he acts, that's what I'm talking about. Like the psychological approach to this. That's why this article is so fascinating, is because if you start looking at it from the generational trauma perspective, Dana and I talked a lot about last night, you can start to see kind of why he is the way he is, which is why I said I have empathy for him, not sympathy, but I have empathy because I understand based upon my own experiences what it's like to be kind of that child or be put in those situations. It's not to say that I'm a fucking sociopath. I'm a fucking deep-rooted narcissist, but I'm not a sociopath. And that's kind of the whole point though. So when I say like he's, trying to phrase it like this, Ray is very much kind of bullying a mental health victim. Yeah, that guy's a dick, but it's like, at what point should you, if you're pushing accountability over entertainment, who are you doing this for? Are you doing this because you want to you want someone to be accountable, or are you talking about childhood trauma from abusive brothers which, you know, we know that that can lead into problems down the road, and taking a passage that was meant to be more of an anecdote and trying to frame it like, oh, well, I mean, who spends time plotting revenge on people? Like, who doesn't ever fucking think back to hindsight 2020 in their mind? Like, if I see that motherfucker again, this is what I'm going to say to him. I'm going to practice what I'm going to say to this guy. So I know that's what I'm frustrated with, because as a child who dealt with abuse, not from my family, but like from outside sources, like I understand, that's what I empathize with that whole perspective. And I find, you know, someone like Ray, who's talking about like the power structure abuse and all of these other things, of which there are apt reasons to discuss. It's like, now this is just a personal vendetta against not even your main target. It's not even your main fucking target. And he's just bitchy because he called him a bad actor. Like,
see, I wouldn't call it bitchy though, personally. And I think that here's the thing, right? We can debate if he's responding to this article in the most tactile way, similar to the James Gunn thing. We can argue or say, well, is this really the right thing to say? But here's the thing. Ray, whether people want to believe this or not, he is a victim in all of this as well. Right?
He is. Yeah, no, he absolutely is.
And he needs to respond in the way that he feels content with. And listen, right? If I'm a victim of abuse and harassment, and the victim of a situation that truly scarred my career and my livelihood and my just profession and like everything I'm about as a person, I'd be clearly pissed. And I would, not only would I be pissed, but I would, you know, I would understand. I would, you know, I would show empathy toward that person for speaking out in maybe a harsh way. I mean, it's very harsh, but he has a reason to be harsh, is the thing, right? May not have to agree with it, but I think it's important to understand where he's coming from. I don't think it's coming out of
I
being
do
petty or being bitchy, though.
I say that, you know, after all of these, almost, you know, definitely over a year and a half of this, I feel that it's, you know, this is kind of like, I don't know. I do feel like it's petty, and I do feel that it's, I feel that it's, you know, not to say that Josh deserves any sympathy, because he doesn't. He's fucked up. He's paying the price, but there's still something about what I view as kicking someone when they're down. And it's like, you know, Josh made mistakes of his own accord, and he is absolutely paying that price. And I'm coming at this again from my own personal perspective of having been canceled and what that cost me. Right. And
I totally understand your perspective.
But,
and that's a valid perspective.
And there's a reason why I don't know if it's this next slide or not. Let me see here. Right. It is this. This is what really pissed me off today, because he should have just led with this and then probably, like, I don't know, calm the fuck down, because he comes out last thing. Please don't put me on a pedestal. I've made more mistakes and apologies in life than I can count. Taking accountability for our actions and how they may have affected others can be some of the hardest work to do, but we must try in earnest to do it. Accountability over entertainment. Now, I agree with that statement. We shouldn't put anybody on a pedestal, period. But you should lead with this. Lead with this. Because all the comments when he's tweeting out are people that are just bashing on Joss or blindly loving Ray. And you can look at those quotes, and they're people that we're mutual friends with here on Twitter that are just blindly loving him and saying, here's your crowned king, drag him, beat him up, kick his ass.
But I would argue this. I would argue that there's context for that, though, because for the last year and a half, people have constantly doubted Ray, doubted what he's been claiming, doubting him, kind of saying, well, maybe Joss Whedon did nothing wrong. And for in this moment, it's validation, and he's using this validation. It's this validation that he is using as a platform to say what he needs to say and respond. Because here's the ultimate thing, right? It's that second paragraph right there. Taking accountability for our actions and how they may have affected others can be some of the hardest work to do, but we must try and earn to do it. That is what Josh failed to do in that interview.
And I agree.
He didn't
and
really
I
take
absolutely
accountability for his actions whatsoever. There was no real true apology. It's more so like, here's my sad life story.
True.
Here's everything that happened to me.
You're right.
But I'm still throwing in these little digs here and there.
No, and you're absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right. And that's why no sympathy is granted. But again, it's like you know, our ego is designed to protect us, right? There's a spiritual coach that I liked. I'm not spiritual myself, but I just kind of like the cut of this dude's jib. And he says that the ego stands for edging God out. And the idea there is that it essentially means that you're just kind of like, you're just distancing yourself. It's all about you, and it's not about connecting to spirit. Again, that's not my belief, but I just kind of like the feel of it, the vibe of what he was trying to say. And his name is Dr. Wayne Dyer, by the way, who had another great quote that people buy your music, not your words, which I love that quote. People buy your passion. And I understand Ray's passionate. I get that. And he has every right to be. I just feel like looking at the way this week specifically going after James Gunn, constantly kind of like sniping at Hamada. And that's fine. I don't care about that. But Gunn had nothing to do with it, and then using his platform as a way to kind of like power drive Gunn, who already gets hit constantly with shit and was already hit with liking a tweet about David Ayer, and him and Ayer are cool. And people always bring it up and throw it back in his face. And he's trying to move on with his life. And he's got nothing to do with that shit. And then to be drug into it again. And then here come all of these zealots and all of these people that are just like attack. And that's been my frustration this week with Ray Fisher.
Well, here's what I'd ask you though. Is your frustration more at Ray Fisher or the way that people within the fandom and the people who support Ray react to his posts? Like, is the frustration more with him or with the people who are platforming him?
The people platforming him would be. I mean, he's platforming himself on Twitter, so.
Remember where that
I know. I think you mean the people that are responding to it. Yeah, signal boost. The thing is, though, but he's fully aware of what's going to happen because he's not dumb. He's not a dumb guy. He's a very intelligent guy. I think Ray is a very smart dude. Like I like to listen to him talk because I think he's got a lot of interesting insight and stuff. And we do agree on a lot politically. We're both Bernie guys, So I think he's a very intelligent individual and he understands precisely what he's doing. He knew how to manipulate the media, and rightfully so, because Warner's was fucking around, but at the end of the day, he got what he wanted, but he didn't get the result that he wanted. And I think that's been the bigger issue here, and then bringing up this thing here of like, don't put me on a pedestal, but take accountability for your actions. I think is a little bit hypocritical. And because he's been taking shots at Joss about like his childhood and about like, things he had said.
Here's the thing, right? It all comes back to empathy, right? I can understand if you are a victim of abuse or a victim of harassment from an individual, that overall it's very hard to have empathy towards that person. There's people in my life who have affected me in such a ways to where I probably would never feel empathy towards that person no matter what happens to them. This is the reality of the situation. I can try my best. And obviously I want to be an empathetic person overall, but there are certain individuals we come across in life that we simply will never have empathy for, right? And again, he is choosing to respond in the way that he feels he needs to, because again, he was a victim in all this, as we both mentioned and agree upon, but he needs to respond in a way that gives himself closure, right? And again, this is a moment of validation, given he's been faced with all this stuff about people saying that he's been lying, that he's not truthful, or he's only in this for certain things, yada, yada, yada. This was a moment of validation for him, and I can understand him saying what he needs to say, because again, it's a moment of validation and somewhat, I wouldn't say like a victory for him, but it's more so like, again, validation and like, wow, look at how he's embarrassing himself right now. Because at the end of the day, that Josh interview did not help Josh. If anything, it helped people like Ray out more.
Couldn't you just simply say, wow, look at him embarrass himself, and then move on with your day? Doesn't that old adage apply? If you lower yourself down, right? If you play in the mud, you're still going to get dirty, right? Like that's the whole point of accountability over entertainment, because playing in the mud is fun. Flinging mud is fucking fun. Talking shit is a lot of fucking fun, but it doesn't make you any fucking better. It doesn't. And I've been around the internet long enough to like play in the mud with a lot of idiotic people, myself, and do very dumb things. All I'm saying is that if you're pushing this accountability over, this is the mantra here. You either live by it or you don't. And I just think at this point, I just don't see it. I haven't seen that at a rate.
But is he not holding Joss?
No, he's not.
Though?
He's not. He's holding Joss accountable, but he's not holding himself accountable for the things that he's
But again,
implying
though, couldn't
there.
it be argued though that Josh kind of threw the mud first, based on what he said in that interview?
Calling him a malevolent force and then a bad faith actor is just
it's clearly meant to be a slight against him, though. That's my
sure,
point.
sure. It is
If
meant to
he's
be a
throwing the
slight
mud-
against him.
If he's throwing the mud first, sometimes you got to throw the mud right back.
No, I mean, maybe if it wasn't like 6 months old or whatever the fuck, I don't know. I see what you're trying to argue there, and I think you do make an interesting point. I just also feel that you know, you're only really responsible for how you respond to something, and you know,
Yeah,
maybe
listen,
like
we can have the debate on whether he responded in the most tactile way, but again, he's responding in the way that he needs to give himself personal closure, and again, he has to do things his way. That's how it goes. At the end of the day, Ray needs to
sure,
do what Ray needs to do for himself.
sure.
Right?
But I think
Because
what about
it said, as you said earlier, he's a very smart man. I think he knows what he's doing. He knows why he's doing the way he's doing it. Whether we agree upon that, maybe we won't, but he knows what he's doing ultimately. And I think he put these tweets out for a reason, because his overall message is, while it may be hard for Josh to take accountability for what he did, he ultimately needs to if he's ever going to be truly forgiven. That's the message at the end of the day.
he should have just said the fuck that then, and not done 3-4 tweets attacking elements of his childhood, that and trying to paint him as something that he's not. You know what I mean? And like, that's what I'm talking about, is like, you know, you can say some things without maybe going all the way, you know, like when I was debating Jeremy last week, like, you know, there was probably a lot more I could have said to him, and you know, but I was like really trying to hold back, because I knew that if I did that, like I will say, when I called Odin a dipshit, he was able to kind of count that as a point, because that went personal. And then from there, it detracted from the overall debate, because he was able to kind of get a bit of a foothold. You know what I mean? So it's like, in these scenarios, when you're playing that out in public, you're doing it for, honest to God, you're doing it for blood sports. Like, he's just doing it to take his shots right now. And I get that. But
unless he believes there's a reason behind it, though. There's a reason he's going about it the way he is.
maybe.
I mean, that's the thing too, right? We don't like, and I'm going to say this line. I don't mean this begrudgingly or in a bad way, but we do not know what was said between Josh and Ray Fisher during personal conversations on that set. Maybe there is a reason he is responding in the way he is, whether it's mudslinging or getting into blood sports or not, for a reason. Ultimately, we will not be privy to that, and we're still not privy to that right now. But again, I'm choosing to give him the benefit of the doubt ultimately, because I understand that he is a victim and he needs to respond in a way that gives himself closure on the situation.
Well, and I would hope that at this point it does boil down to closure. But let's be fair. There's not going to be any closure. Like,
it's because he deserves an apology from Walter Hamada, and Jeff Johns is still employed. So I understand why there's no closure for him right now, because many of the issues he brought up are still not resolved. It's only 1/3 of the way done.
I think he does need to get an apology. Whether or not it happens is going to be, you know, I mean, look, after a while, people become apathetic to the cries, and that's going to be something again that, you know, it's
all it takes is 3 words. Technically 2 if you want to like do it. Just say, "I'm sorry."
Yeah. Oh no, I know. But
it's a very simple thing from that one camp. That's all it takes.
It is. I mean, John Berg already said he was sorry, which is good for him. And
interesting, how he will apologize, but nobody else will,
because he's not employed at Warner Brothers. He was he was brought in on his own thing. But there was issues there, clearly, like, and I think Emmerich has a lot to do with this as well. But clearly, you know, clearly Ray's not going to go after Emmerich, because that's you know, that comes with consequences. It doesn't matter if you're not going to work with Warner Brothers or not. You start going after the studio heads, you know, like the actual studio heads. It's going to be a different thing there. But you know, well, Benson here says, and there's another super chat from him I want to get to here in a second. It says, we have no proof from Fisher about what Whedon actually says. No proof, no evidence. Why? Because he doesn't have any. I mean,
he's given testimonials, and again, if he has something, he is, again, giving him the benefit of the doubt. I think he is not releasing things because he is waiting for the I think he clearly at this point, I think he has a plan for the way he wants to go about this. Whether or not it's going to be successful for him to get what he wants, I don't know. But he's clearly said what he's needed to say thus far. He's given testimonials and he's said a lot at this point. And I think the proof or evidence, right, is in the pudding in some regards. And I think also it's just he's waiting for the right moment to release some of this stuff probably as well.
Well, I mean, again, we'll have to wait and see because it could be the merger. Who knows? It all depends on everyone's waiting on that right now. But Benson did say here, and I thank you, buddy. Says we have a fat, overweight alcoholic, a fan throttler, and a man baby upset his role was cut. But Whedon's the bad guy after admitting he has a sex addiction. I mean,
that's a bad take, man. That's a really bad take.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with RJ on that one. Look, the thing is, like, it's not the sex addiction that's the problem. It's
way more than that, dude.
It's definitely all about the abuses of power, going back to Buffy and Angel and things along those lines. Because that's a lot of what he did. Like, he did sleep with fans, he did abuse his position. You know, his excuse for like why he did it. I mean, I was actually talking about with my girlfriend tonight. We were talking about it, and I'm just like, you know, when we were in LA. Like, yeah, you're surrounded by all these women. You know what I mean? Like, you know who the cosplayer Chloe Dykstra is?
Yes, I do.
So I ran into her at a party, right? She was the most attractive girl in this party. Like, you know, she walked in. It was like that scene from Can't Hardly Wait where everyone just stops and looks. You know, like this was for Destructoid. This was a Destructoid E3 party in 2011, and I ended up talking with her for a while. Surprisingly about movie special effects because her dad actually worked on X-Men First Class. And but my friend I was with was like couldn't talk to her, you know, like just completely brain dead thinking with his dick. And later on he's like, how could you talk to her? You know, and I'm like, because I wasn't gonna fuck her. Like that, I have a girlfriend, I wasn't gonna fuck her. Like I wasn't trying to fuck her. My brain is not thinking. The lizard brain that just wants to like procreate isn't thinking like that, you know. But when you're in a position where like you're in the position of power and all of these women are like literally, you know, giving you all this attention for whatever reason, it's very easy to kind of slip into that. And it's like, I've known people who have like hooked up on set. I've known people that have done that kind of crap. It's not always good. You know, and so I'm not saying it's like the best move. I definitely an abuse of power, but it's kind of like there's like a lot of his actions were done when he was put in a position of power and there was no one to kind of hold him accountable. And that was a problem that should have been handled back then. We would be in a much different world now, which if that is what Ray wants to do is to hold him accountable to try to work towards being a better person, then fucking empathy is key. What I saw today wasn't empathy. What I saw today was malice, and that really bothered me because I thought, you know, I thought someone who was upset at abuse would not hurl more of it themselves.